And so I think we have the opportunity to hear from one who can well inform our work if we listen well. So I invite you to listen to Mrs. Marian Wright Edelman.
Thank you. Thank you. I love Starsky. And you're lucky to have him, and we're lucky to have him. And we're going to build that movement with voices that's powerful like that. I mean, I think every Sunday school ought to be a freedom school. The children start coming back and being engaged because freedom schools are dying up, and we want everything to have a freedom school. These children need alternatives to the streets. They need mentors. And when I was growing up in my little segregated hometown of South Carolina, my daddy was a Baptist preacher. He always said God runs a full employment economy, and that if you just follow the need, you will never lack for something meaningful to do. And we didn't like it a whole lot growing up because we were always pointed. We had old man Reddick, who was in his 90s. He began to wander the streets. We didn't know about old-timers back then. And so, he said, if you see a need, don't ask why somebody doesn't do something. Figure out what you're going to do. And so we ended up starting a home for the aged across the street from our church. And we had to cook and clean, and we children sure didn't like it. But that's how we learned that that was our responsibility. And my mama, in her 80s, we figured out, and my children, she was still running that home for the aged, and everybody down there was younger than she was. And we had to finally make her retire. But if you see a need, you do something. I have 12 foster sisters and brothers because my mama took them all in after we all left off for college, and we had to say when she was 80 years old that she really couldn't adopt 2-year-old twins, that she really was out of her thing. And every single issue I work on at the Children's Defense Fund comes out of my childhood experience, which was segregated, which told black children we weren't worth very much, but we had adults who told us that wasn't true. And so we knew it wasn't true because our church folks said it wasn't true, and they tried to provide alternatives for us. We didn't have any playgrounds we could go to outside of the public school, which gave us all the hand-me-down stuff. But so my daddy built one behind the church. And whenever they saw a need, they tried to respond. I saw in front of our church, I think I told this at lunch, we had an accident in front of our church, and a migrant family, a black migrant family, collided with a white truck driver. We all ran out. Children were not protected from anything. We were very much exposed to whatever the adults were exposed to, and I went everywhere my parents went, and I listened to all the old folks' gossip. So I got educated very early on about everything. And I've never forgotten the fact that ambulance came, white ambulance drivers. These people were laying on the streets. The migrant workers were black. The white truck drivers were white. And they saw that the white truck drivers were not injured, and they drove off and left the black, sick, very injured people out on the highway. I never forgot that. I do immunizations and child health care because little Johnny Harrington lived with his grandma Ruth, which was 3 houses down from the church. He stepped on a nail. He got tetanus. He didn't get immunization. And we didn't know nothing about immunizations back then, I think, if you were in the poor community. And he died. I am a pit bull about immunizations because I remember little Johnny Harrington. I remember all the things we could not do, and I cannot stand to see a child excluded from anything any other child has access to. And one of the things that we were very clear about is that God didn't make 2 classes of children, and that every child is sacred. And we can listen to the white kids play in that swimming pool across, you could hear them out there having the best fun. Well, so my mom and daddy, they began a playground behind our church, and a skating rink behind our church, and a little dinky canteen behind our church. So we would have an alternative way of doing it. And while the external world told us we were not important, our teachers, our preachers, not a whole heap of them, and they getting along a little better. The preachers are hard selling. But I had extraordinary parents and extraordinary community parents, and we were community property. And while the external world said we weren't worth much, that message was counted by adults who every day made clear that we knew we were children of God, that we were sacred, and that nobody could impinge on that, and when we grew up, we could change the world. And so I'm so grateful. And we were always exposed to good role models. And that's why this place and having a gathering center and having children see what they can become, it's very hard to be what you can't see and you're not exposed to. And I just, before we had a second pair of shoes, we had books. And we'd have to sit with our daddy every night and read. Lord have mercy, and I stuck a True Confessions when I was inside a Life magazine one night as we were sitting to read. But reading was, he would read for many hours in his study. And he looked over and he said, "What you reading?" And I said, "I was held up my Life magazine, thought I was for." And then he asked me to read it out loud. He asked me to pull that thing you got inside the Life magazine. And boy, I never read a True Confession again, I will tell you. But the bottom line is that children do what the adults who are important to them do, not what we tell them to do. And we always had books in our home, and we always read and knew that was important, and even if they were hand-me-downs. But we always had books when we didn't have a second pair of shoes. And we always knew when somebody had a need that you didn't say somebody should do something about that. What can you do about that? And so the importance of adults who care and have a sense of faith being something that's applicable to everybody, they really try to live their faith. And I still get up every morning to try to be half as good as Miss Spanaloo Haim and them old folk in Mississippi who used to call me up and get me up in the middle of the night because some child was being mistreated. And when I looked at the sacrifices they went through to give children a better life, I get myself up. And so I just feel so lucky, and I just want to say, be adults. Children watch everything you do. They don't pay much attention to what you say, but they really do what you do. And so you teach by it all. And so I really just want to stress the thanks for all of you coming together to do something that's beautiful for children. And children need beauty. And this center is beautiful, and art is beautiful, and music is wonderful, and freedom schools are fun. And when Sunday schools become like freedom schools, you're going to have some full freedom schools and Sunday schools because it's about joy. I mean, it's about adults really caring, and children really want to be like the adults that they admire. And so you are the role models, whether you like it or not. And you've been really mighty good role models in giving them this beautiful center and having a good sense to have that leader over there, whom we just adore. And so I'm hoping that more Sparskas in the world out of Proctor. There's a new generation of preachers coming up. And I just hope that they're going to be there that open up the church doors and open up the synagogue doors and open up the mosque doors to our children. It's been very interesting because we had a debate about whether we're going to open up, we should do Proctor as interfaith. And the Muslims said no. We do it through freedom schools. Let the children get to know each other back in communities. Don't try to break what ain't work, what is working. But what you do is to try to do it by starting with the children at home. We had some problems with Somali boys don't want to have, women teachers, but they got to get over it because they're now in the United States, and so they got to learn. And so it's a nice socialization thing. And so freedom schools are fun. And they bring people together. And who says learning has to be boring? I mean, who says children can't get excited? And I swear, I go into freedom school the second day, and half the kids have never been to freedom school, and they know every chant. They know that something inside so strong. I said, you sure you started that freedom school yesterday? Children need fun. They need joy, and they need the energy of these incredible college students. And they get through that role modeling. The sense of, my gosh, there's something called college, and I can do that because look at who they've given. And I love them in secure detention facilities. One of my favorite stories is in Houston, where a little boy's sentence had ended the first week freedom school started, and he came back the next Monday and knocked on the door and said, I ain't leaving until that fun school is over. He wanted to come back in for 5 weeks. So, I mean, they need to see an alternative. And one of the stories I love most is in Charlotte, when I was sitting next to a juvenile court judge, and Charlotte has 19 freedom schools, and they have Hugh McCall, my homeboy from Bennettsville, South Carolina, now because he's Nation Bank former, but he does this Broadway show that he brings down to Charlotte for all the North Carolina kids, and he lets the South Carolina kids come too since he's living and he's from my hometown. And it's really the energy, it will just knock you out of the room. And I was sitting next to a juvenile court judge at this thing when the kids were singing something inside so strong, and she gasped. And I said, "What's the matter with you?" And she said, she pointed to a little girl out in the audience, out on the floor, about 11 years old. She said, "I had that child in my court 3 years ago. I thought I'd never see her smile again." And she was out there singing something inside so strong, and I don't care how high you build your barriers, I'm going to come over them. Children need to be built strong inside, and these servant leader interns, who are what they want to grow up to be like, and the energy and the fun. Who says school can't be fun? And so I just hope that we will make communities fun. We should reinstitute oratorical contests. I can still speak Ralph Bunche's 1946 commencement speech at Fisk University. And we had oratorical contests. That's how we learned Black history. If you didn't have books in your house, we all had to get out there and pick our own sermon. But the barriers of race can be surmounted. Take them to hear great speakers. I heard Mary McLeod Bethune at Benedict College. I had never seen a black woman command a room like that. That was the first time I ever heard the blacker the berry, the sweeter the juice. And she would tell all these stories about how she would go into white hat shops, because she was a big hat person, and try them all on, and they would get all upset, and she would then sort of say, you know who I am? I am Mary McLeod Bethune. And this sense of strength and pride and individuality and being exposed to that. Now, I hated Mordecai Johnson until I was an adult, because he used to come every year to the Columbia Auditorium. Daddy would drive us 100 miles over to here. They had the hardest seats that folded up and down. And he would speak for 4 hours with an intermission. Oh, man, we heard that, is Dr. Johnson coming back? It took me until I was out of college and law school to appreciate the message of Mordecai Johnson. But exposing young people to great leaders and to good role models in your community, because it's hard to be what you can't see. And that's a part of it all. And I'll tell you, the secret sauce in Freedom Schools in many ways is these energetic servant leaders who are confident, who are full of energy, who make learning fun. And I tell you, I run into them everywhere, and they're going to help transform, and I'm trying to keep everybody out of law school. They all ought to go into education and become the new role models or to be the public health folk, and I just can't tell you how wonderful they are, and they are everywhere. I got to tell you a story. I don't know, this is not the story. This is not what I was going to talk about here tonight. But she got me all caught up, y'all got to get Freedom Schools everywhere. These children need to be off the street. They are terrified about gun violence. They are terrified about gangs, and they need positive alternatives to the streets. They also need to see what they can be. And they just hang on to these wonderful young role models who have stories that they can tell, and I can brag on them all. I'm always amazed at the resilience of children and young people. And I love that, particularly I'm very pleased about the Freedom Schools and homeless shelters. And we have this little girl who's about 3, she's about 4 feet 4, who came into our ambit, came into our awareness through our Be Theology program. And that's something you might want to consider as a build-on, because there are children who are struggling against hell. I don't know how they make it, frankly. Without parents, with imprisoned parents, with violence, fell most of us. And we've now got about 1,000. We've got our first Rhodes Scholar this year at Balliol. His dad is in prison for life. But this little girl came into our Washington one, and she's beautiful. Very mentally ill mother and a father who'd abandoned her and was in the Army. And the next time I see him, I'm going to hit him over the head with a baseball bat, because he stood her up twice. He left home. He's in the Army. But he was going to meet her in Harvard Square. When she got into MIT, when she told us she wanted to go to MIT, we said, "That's sweet, child. That's really sweet, but why don't you apply to a few other places?" Well, she got into MIT, and one of my board members adopted her. This is not the speech I was going to give y'all, but y'all got to move around. But at any rate, this little 4'6" mixed child got herself in with this crazy mother and with a support system from one of my board members, got herself into MIT. She applied to Ivy League, got in all of them. You never know what's behind these children, okay? You just don't know what they give. She got into Harvard. She got in every place she applied. And her father was supposed to meet at Harvard, never did. And her mother was very mentally ill, and she also, she'd had a pretty unstable life. She'd been in and out of homeless shelters, but she taught in the homeless shelter in D.C. General Hospital, and she could tell those homeless children that this is a comma, this is not the end of your life, you can overcome, and she could tell her own story. But then she got out. She needed a support system. She had some mentally ill. She had a struggle. But then she got out, and her mother had a single car accident and died. But then she called up afterwards and said, I think I want to go to MIT and do electrical engineering. We said that's all sweet, but that child graduated from MIT a semester late with a 4.3 average in electrical engineering. But then she said to us, I don't want to be an electrical engineer, but my mama didn't think I could support her if I became an artist, which is what I really want to do. We said, now you can do whatever you want to do. We are just throwing away gold every day in the leadership potential of our children. And so I just, she could teach, and she's taught in the Freedom School where we have 600 homeless children in D.C. General Hospital. Is a hellhole. Children is not fit for children, it's not fit for anybody. But she could say to these kids, I was here, this is a comma, you can make it. And so we have no right to give up on any child. And I think that Freedom School begins to bring that all out. They begin to see, these young people who've not had it easy too. So thank you so much for Freedom Schools. We want them everywhere. They need to be out after school. They ought to be Saturday schools. They work in juvenile detention facilities. They work in homeless shelters. And I hope that the pedagogy of Freedom Schools will change Sunday schools. We've been using Freedom School books some ex-cons did in one place in New York, and the kids started coming back to school, to Sunday school. They need to have fun. They need to be challenged, but they need to have something that's appropriate for them. And we adults need to stop putting things for children in our own adult frame. So that's a big sermon that I had not on my thing. But I came here today to say I want y'all to help us end the violence of child poverty and of guns. Our children are absolutely terrified, okay? And we really have got, and that's why you want positive alternatives to the streets, so that they have safe spaces where they can go. And so that my two things is to come and say, it's really, we've got 13.2 million children who are living in poverty, and about 6 million of them are living in extreme poverty. That's twice the entire population of the state of Missouri, if you want to kind of have a context for thinking about how many poor children we have. That's bad. That's bad. And we can do better than that. And the number of poor children, just in Missouri, you got 261,353 poor children in Missouri. That's 6 times the population of your state capital. Y'all can do better than that. And a lot of these kids are not getting what they need to be able to come out and work. It's so much cheaper to educate a child than imprison a child. And we really need to get our heads screwed on right and to say we're not going to sort of continue this cradle to prison pipeline where states are spending 2 to 3 times more per prisoner than per public school pupil. That's just dumb. It's also mean, and it also is shunting children off that our children are going to have to live with. And we're seeing what's going on with gun violence. We see what the violence of poverty means. And so it's all in our self-interest. So it's the right thing to do for children because I think each child is sacred. And secondly, it's the right thing to do if we're worried about money. And third, if we're going to be competitive in the future, we need to be educating every child we can. And that is a part of what America's promise is. And that's why you're providing a core center for children to come and see what they can be through good role models and making things fun. And there's no reason why school can't be fun. I was telling about the jamboree that Hugh McCall brings. He brings a Broadway play down to Charlotte every year in the South and North Carolina. Kids all come together. And I was sitting next to a juvenile court judge in the middle of Something Inside So Strong being sung by the kids at the end. And she gasped, and I said, "What's the matter, Judge?" And she said, "You see that little girl out there?" And she pointed to a child about 12, 13. She said, "I had that child in my court 3 years ago. I thought I'd never see her smile again." And she was out there saying, "I don't care how high you build your barriers, I'm going to jump over." I mean, it can be fun. Education can be empowering. And I had that in a poor community growing up, even though the external world said I wasn't worth much. The adults said that's not so. And they loved us, and they were poor folk who loved us, and Miss Hayman, Mississippi loved us. And so you're becoming a community where children can come, be safe, be loved, be respected, and have high expectations. That said, I really do want to ask you to join in ending child poverty in America. This is the 50th anniversary of the Poor People's Campaign. But Robert Kennedy came and had his epiphany in Mississippi, and there are a bunch of new things coming out. But it really changed his life. Dr. King came to Marks, Mississippi to preach a funeral in 1967 as well. Went into a Head Start center that had been defunded because we went around the state of Mississippi, but they ran the center without any help from HEW for a while, or from OEO for a while. And he saw a teacher carve up an apple into 8 places to give to 8 of the children, and he burst into tears and had to leave the place. But out of that struggle of adults trying to do something to make their children have a better life, and running that program when OEO's funding, or the poverty program's funding, they saw their children being joyful. They saw their children seeing books that looked like them. They built these things. They gave these children hope. But out of that came the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. Out of that came the challenge of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party to the Democratic Party in Atlantic City. But out of that also came a lot of hunger, because the state of Mississippi wanted to make everybody leave. They wanted to just push them out. And chemical weed killers and minimum wage for agricultural workers and new laws in Washington were making it very difficult, so they wanted to make the poor folk just leave. But most of them didn't have enough literacy to get on the bus to figure out where they could go. And so it was really a crisis. And so we began to beg just to get some food for folk, and they switched from food stamps to food stamps and charged $2 per person. People didn't have any income. We still have about 2 million people who have no income in this country, and they can't afford food stamps. They could get these bad commodities. But the bottom line is that the crisis of hunger came up, and Dr. King had been exposed, and we began to beg the congressmen to come down to Mississippi, and they came, and Robert Kennedy, I used to beg everybody, I didn't care who they were, just would you come out and see these folk in the Delta, because nobody could believe there's nobody with no income, or that people were really living third world conditions. And happily, we had hearings in Washington. Mainly they were trying to destroy Head Start, but when they came down to talk about fraud in Head Start, which we had disproved, I begged them to go up to the Mississippi Delta. And they did. Robert Kennedy got transformed, and there are 2 extraordinary books coming out this year. And he said, I never saw anything like this. In all the third world countries I went, I never saw anything. The children's bloated bellies. And he just got to be a pit bull. And it was really from him transmitting to Dr. King, who'd seen the hunger in Mississippi, that we should have a Poor People's Campaign. We just bring the poor to Washington, because the bureaucrats absolutely were not moving, and the Southerners had a lot of seniority. But the bottom line is that was the Poor People's Campaign. And I feel so lucky to have been at the intersection of great events, great needs, and great leaders. So I moved to Washington to set up the little dinky federal policy office. I just saw, I'm going through y'all keep your records about how things develop, because history is really important. And I've been going through the boxes on the Poor People's Camp, and I saw that Resurrection City, that my little 1-bedroom apartment in an old Civil War hospital in Washington was the official place where all the legal stuff came from, Resurrection City. I said, boy, that's pretty cute. All the cabinet members are writing in my little one, there'll be a lot of things coming out, because the Poor People's Campaign was not a failure. Things are hard to get done, but the seeds that were planted there led to a second Poor People's Campaign the next year. It wasn't in the press a whole lot. President Nixon had everybody come to the White House with his whole cabinet, didn't want us going around making noises and messing up things at the individual agencies. And every time and Ralph Abernathy, because by that time both Kennedy and King were dead, but by that time, with the speeches with the whole cabinet and the president, he said this is a Mississippi problem. This is not a problem that's a national problem, which is always the way you can do it. And Ralph Abernathy, we kept saying, no. This is a national problem. It's all over the place. It's on Native American reservations. It's in rural Appalachia. It's everywhere. It wasn't a good meeting, y'all. And every time we would talk about these folk, he would tell us he was bringing peace in Vietnam. And this really was a local problem. Bottom line, though, within 4 months, he had set in place. And again, the point is you have to stay out in the community, and you have to keep telling stories, and you have to keep making people have to see it directly and put a face behind the numbers. Within 4 months, and Bob Coles and a lot of doctors, and the Field Foundation is one of my favorite foundations. They funded everybody to go out and just document hunger. And before he died, Robert Kennedy had gone to CBS and gotten documentaries showing a baby dying to a malnourished mother on the CBS reports. And then there were just a lot of things that converged. And so you got to try everything. And you got to keep at it, because Mississippi's powerful delegation in the Vietnam War, and nobody wanted to offend appropriations for that. But within 4 months, Richard Nixon had put into place some studies, and turns out he found it was a national problem. And there were all these different reports coming out. And within a year, he held a White House conference on hunger in America. And from that flowed a whole lot of things. And there are a whole lot of folk now on food stamps, and on food commodities, and on WIC, and on a whole lot. They ought to thank them poor people in the mud in Resurrection City, and a lot of follow-up scut work. And you're gonna get an awful lot of books this year, so we just have to sort of just keep at it. And one of the things that I think is very important, we don't see the poor children in our neighborhood very often. And you really need to take people out to see these children, to see their bloated bellies, to see the conditions, to see them hungry in the summer. And like Medicaid, they won't take the summer feeding program, 100% federal funding, and jobs for cafeteria workers and for bus drivers in rural areas. They won't take it. And we've got to figure out how to break that through. But the point is, we've come a long way, but we still have 13.2 million poor children, and you've got a whole lot of poor children here, the 261,000 in Missouri, and this is the year we want to end it. We've made a lot of progress. There are 50 laws on the books that you didn't know you had, but we did it quietly, age by age, increment by increment. And so 95% of all children now get CHIP and Medicaid. Now you got to stop and keep it, because they're going to try to take it away every week. They haven't been able to do it yet. But you know, and you just don't. You just have to keep at it and persevere. And I told the luncheon group, I don't know how much overlap there is, and I'm not going to talk too much longer. Is that you don't know, you should always be ready when opportunity opens. And we got 10 proposals for everything we want, okay? And in the middle of this terrible budget struggle in this Congress, where they were trying to take away absolutely everything, this is the worst time we had some bad times, but this is the worst time we've ever faced. There was a whole lot of bargaining going on that we didn't know about, but we had for 15 years, we've been trying to stop children who don't need to be in foster care or don't need to be in institutions to be able to get family preservation studies to work and stay in their homes. Well, glory be. When the senator called and said, "You won't believe what we just got." I said, "What'd you get?" He got our family. We have an open-ended entitlement now to get children out, to be able to stay with their parents and their grandparents, and to stay out of group homes and stay out of institutions. Now they're going to try to take it away next week, but you just have to be standing there at the door. And in fact, the folks never mind. We got a family preservation program, y'all, and I'm so happy, and my mama would be so happy that children can work it. But you need to make sure that Senator McCaskill knows y'all know about that, and that she make sure they don't touch it, okay? Because they never give up. All the group home people, all the institution people are in Washington all last week. And so they never give up. We can never give up. We're not over. We got CHIP for another 10 years. Got 10 years, and that's going to be good. But again, you can't close your eyes. You can't turn your back, because there will be. You just have to be like hawks. And so it's really so important. But we're so pleased. The community health centers have got a big boost in funding. And I'm so pleased about that. The child care block grant, they needed some votes at the end on a bad budget bill, okay? So they were really able to bargain. But we got a doubling of the child care block grant. The community health centers got a big boost. I mean, the Lord sent some big rainbows in the clouds. And I don't like to talk about nothing until we make sure we got it. And then you have to fight to keep it. But I just want to say, good things can happen when people don't give up, and when they really try to keep children there. So it's very important. With that as a backdrop, with this being the 50th anniversary of the Poor People's Campaign, and it was not a failure, and we can document all the laws that have been passed without fanfare, you can get an awful lot done if you give other people the credit and do the work. And so we've got 50 laws on the books that could never have been done if we were talking about poor adults. But we did a study on the cost of child poverty, had a Nobel laureate economist at MIT do it, and he concluded that it's too expensive to keep child poverty at this level, and that we should really begin to prevent it, and we can save money and save lives and build a strong workforce. Bob Solow at MIT. We then asked the Urban Institute in 2015 to do another look at 9 programs that we thought could eliminate child poverty. And they came back and said, yes, we could do this, and we could, with things that you know about, earned income tax credit. We've now gone up the minimum wage, and they're coming up with a new study. We've come up with some changes in the programs we used from 3 years ago, and they sure are slow. The bottom line is that we're now going to have a new report on how we can end child poverty and save everybody's money and make sure that our children have what they need to stay in school and to be safe after school and all the things that we know. And so I just hope that I can get the people in this room and the people in Missouri to talk about why we're going to come and save our children, but we're also going to save a whole lot of money in school dropouts. Bob Solow estimated $500 billion every year, and somebody just come up and said there's going to be even more money we could save if we got everybody in school rather than in prison, and states are still spending on average 2 to 3 times more per prisoner than the public school pupil. That's really dumb, folk, and it keeps us scared. And so I just hope that you will look, and I will be sharing with your preachers and with your leader here the new elements of the new bill that we want to have everybody look at and debate and really save children's lives, get them ready for school, keep them safe after school, make sure they get preventive health care, make sure they have good work habits, and make sure that their parents can work. It's the most common sense thing in the world, and it's the only decent thing to do. And so in about a month, I think we will have laid out a policy agenda that it's too good to not do, to save children and to save money. And we hope that you will think about having your own state legislators. They don't have to wait on the federal government to do everything. They can do it, and counties can do it. And so it's time to end poverty. We want to honor Dr. King and honor Robert Kennedy's sacrifice. Let's make that a centerpiece of what we want to do this year. So we'll be back. We want you to endorse it. We want you to fight about it. We want to make sure that we get everybody co-sponsoring. But it is really due. No other country, industrialized country, lets its children be the poorest group in their country. They all have the sense to immunize, to give them preventive health care, to keep them safe, to educate them. And you know, who's going to take care of our Social Security, y'all? If we keep sending them off to prison and draining our own pockets for things that don't work and being scared. And secondly, we really have to stop the scourge of gun violence. 25 years ago, when we convened black leaders, we thought we knew what was on their minds for their children, but it turned out that we didn't know. And we did 2 generations. It's important to listen. And we did focus groups of black young people and black adults, and the number one issue was gun violence. They were terrified. And we started a gun violence campaign, and we have 2 groups of hate files. But the gun folks, they are by far the winners. And Ben & Jerry's, we started an anti-gun campaign. But you know, you see what's going on. This has been 25 years. And Freedom Schools is an alternative to the streets. They need safe spaces to go and to talk nonviolence and to read books and they're scared going to and from schools. They're scared in school. There's no safe space. And so I just hope that you all will keep this issue alive, because my goodness, what kind of country lets its children go through this kind of struggle? And I just want to give you one figure to put it in perspective. Between 1963 and 2016, particularly with black children, and Brian Stevenson, if you haven't read Brian Stevenson's book, and he's going to have a new museum he's doing on lynching shortly, 65,947 black children and teens have been killed by guns. That's more than 16 times the recorded lynchings of black people of all ages in the 74 years from 1877 to 1950. And when one looks in other industrialized countries, they think we are crazy. We do a child gun violence report, and we have this data that's available. But you know, we have about 310 million guns in the hands of civilians, when the U.S. military and law enforcement agencies possess approximately 4 million guns. There's something wrong with that picture. And while we keep having these crises, I hope by now the message is that nobody is safe anywhere. And we need to and our children certainly are not safe. And I hope that we're going to keep them safe from violence, but at the same time, we're going to prepare them for the future. And that's what this kind of place can do. It creates community, and it gives them positive alternatives to the streets. And I just thank you from the bottom of my heart, and I hope when we unveil the provisions of this bill, which is nothing, it's things we know, things we know work. Housing turns out to be the #1 issue that can have the greatest impact. And when you walk through your nation's capital and you see baby strollers in all the underground tunnels and on the church steps and out in the streets, shame on us. We've got to come to grips with what we're doing with our children, and you can do that in Missouri. And so I just hope that will be the next movement, and we'll honor this 50th anniversary of the Poor People's Campaign by ending child poverty, saving money, saving lives, and sort of honoring what we say we believe. I want to just tell one last story of Robert Kennedy's epiphany when he came to Mississippi, because nobody really believed that there were starving children in this country. And there was a freedom school story in all of this, because in Macomb in 1964, they had a newsletter, and I found it, and it stuck with me, and I told him this story riding in a car in the Mississippi Delta. And it was a little girl who had known that there was a big ball in Macomb, Mississippi, and she'd begged her mother year after year. She said, I want to go. I want to go to that ball down at the Armory. And her mother kept giving her excuses. No, you can't go. You're not old enough. You don't have, you're not ready. You don't got no tickets. They're not going to, whatever. She stalled and stalled and stalled. But Senator Lilly came back every year until finally her mother said, well, you don't have an escort. You got to have an escort to go. That was her last gasp. And she said, well, I'm going to write Robert Kennedy, and he's going to come, and he's going to take me to the ball. And it's a perfect story about how the federal government's let people down in many ways. But at any rate, her mother sort of said, well, all right. And she said, you don't have a ticket? And she said, yes, I do. She said, I got the 14th Amendment, and I've got the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and that's going to get me into the ball. And her mother knew about Mississippi, but she gave in because Senator Lilly had been begging her for years. And so Senator Lilly went off, but the night of the ball, Robert Kennedy called and said he couldn't make it. And which is why half the people, even though half the people in Mississippi always had the pictures of the Kennedy boys, the young people were very bitter about the Kennedy administration because of the things that they didn't do in following up. And he was absolutely stricken, and he said, well, then what happens? And this little girl wrote that I went down, and she knocked and knocked after she heard all the noise and the dancing and the music, because she decided she was going to go on her own. And she convinced her mother that these two things would get her into the ball. And she got down there, and she rang the bell, and they finally opened, and they saw this little girl standing there. And they said, what are you doing? And she said, I came to the ball. And they said, where's your ticket? And so she gave them the 15th Amendment, and they said, that won't get you. That's no ticket. They started laughing. They went, that's not going to get you in this. And then she sort of, she pulled out the 64 Civil Rights Act that had just passed, and they kept laughing, and they kept laughing, and she started crying. And, and it was, you could name a lot of laws since 1964, and we've been able to get. And that doesn't get you into the ball unless there's a caring community that makes a lot of noise, that escorts these children, and that begins to make the paper real in their lives. But I tell you, it was a mean story to tell him, but he got it. But he was a totally changed man. And I just say we ought to celebrate Dr. King and Robert Kennedy, because it was Robert Kennedy's idea, because they didn't get the food down there. He went to Orville Freeman the next day and said, get some food down there. And Orville Freeman said, ain't nobody down here with no income. And he said, I just saw them. They didn't believe us, and they didn't even believe him. And he was furious. That's how I got my husband. They sent my husband back to have to see the same people that we saw. And so that was good. But the bottom line is, it was so hard to move the federal government, which is why. And it was through all that frustration, even with Robert Kennedy and Dr. King, they wouldn't move, which is why the poor came to town. But I just want to say that campaign was not a failure. There was another one the next year. And all of us who are thankful for food stamps and food commodities, and we ought to thank those poor people in the mud. Change is hard, but it takes just a lot of pushing and a lot of staying, and there are 50 laws on the books for children because of people like you, and you can get it through your state legislature. You should help it. It's a bad time in Washington. God sent us some rainbows. We need a positive agenda. Every year we do not keep our children in school. cost us $500 billion. There's a new study we're looking at that says it's $1 trillion, y'all, that every time we send these kids off to prison. And so we can change that. But I really hope that you will join us in saying that we're going to fulfill Dr. King's and Robert Kennedy's dream and end child poverty. And you can't help children without helping their parents. We've got these laws in the books because it's preventive investment and cost effective. And so I just hope that that will be our big cause next year. And we can, this year, it'll be ready in 2 months. And so we're going to be back begging everybody. And you need to worry your people to death who are sitting there in legislatures to do it. And so I just hope that we can move ourselves forward to being not the outlier among industrialized country and making sure that our children feel valued, are going to school and not to prison, are safe after school, and we can do that. And that would be a worthy thank you to Dr. King. He said the first time I heard him at Spelman College in compulsory chapel, which I opposed. But when I became chairman of the board, I reinstituted compulsory chapel so that we could hear what the wise people did. But that time was just, he said, if you can't fly, you drive. And if you can't drive, you run. And if you can't run, you walk. And if you can't walk, you crawl. But you keep moving forward. There are many, many forces trying to move us backwards. We're not going to go backwards. We cannot leave this for our grandchildren to fight all over again. It is time to give every child a fair chance and to have a level playing field to save us money, to save us our fears and walk in the streets because they're children who didn't get what they should have. And so I just hope we'll do it. And each of us, with the role models that we have, and I wear around my neck, and I'm going to sit down because I know I have overdone my time, but Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman keep me going. Because those ladies could do what they did, we can do what we got to do today. And Harriet Tubman, when she got herself away to freedom, and then she came back to bring everybody else, and she had a navigational system that somehow I would never be able to work. But she said she'd never lost a passenger on her Underground Railroad. I don't know any airline or train company that has that kind of record. And so when I feel discouraged and think we're going to lose everything, I just look down and I rub her. But Sojourner's theory of change is the one I guess I want to leave you with, because she was a very powerful orator. And she was absolutely the most determined woman. She got her child back from slavery. She sued. I don't know how she got into court, but anyway, she sued. And she tried to desegregate the trolley systems in Washington, D.C. And she would get on one trolley, they'd throw her off. She'd run to the next stop and get on, and they'd throw her off. And she would run, but she harried them to death. But my favorite story came one day when she was about to speak at a rally, and she got threatened by an old white man who was very hostile, and said if she came, he was going to burn down the place. And she said, then I'll speak to the ashes. But her theory of change was about strategic fleas. And I use her theory all the time, because all of us like to be big dogs, big dogs, and we want to make big differences. But enough strategic fleas biting, and if there are enough of us with our votes, and there are enough of us with our voices, and there are enough of us at the state legislature and the city council, and at the school board meetings, and run for school board, that's the most important office in many ways for children. They keep flicking some of us, the rest of us, keep coming back. So we don't need to be big dogs, we just need to be a whole lot of coordinated, strategic fleas. And if there are enough of us that keep biting, keep voting, we will end child poverty. So, let's get our egos in shape, let's put our children in the middle of the table, and let's get over our differences, whose church this is in, and what denomination this is, let adults get out of the way. And let's just really begin to teach our children, empower our children, and let them know that they are the most important people, because without them, we are not going to have a future. So thank you for what you're doing. It's so important.